On a morning when everything was already going wrong, Catherine Whitmore made a decision. She would spend the rest of the day regretting not because it was the wrong decision, but because it forced her to confront something she had spent years refusing to see. Her private driver had called in sick at 6:45 in the morning, 45 minutes before she was supposed to be in a boardroom across the city, finalizing the most important investment deal of her career. The backup service her assistant Rebecca had arranged fell through. The ride-share estimate was 22 minutes and she needed to be moving in 5. So she did what she never did. She opened a last-minute gig driver app, accepted the first available profile, and told herself it was just a car ride, just a stranger behind a wheel, just a means to an end. The man who pulled up to the curb outside her building 3 minutes later was a tall black man in his late 20s with closely cropped hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and a steady, watchful gaze. He drove a clean but aging sedan, wore a faded button-down shirt pressed neatly at the collar, and had the quiet, unhurried manner of someone who had long since stopped needing to impress anyone. On the dashboard, taped in the lower right corner, where it would not obstruct his view, was a small piece of construction paper with a child's drawing on it, a stick figure, father and daughter holding hands beneath a yellow sun. The words, "I love you, Daddy," written in careful, oversized letters across the top. His name, according to the app, was Andre Brooks. He was 28 years old. He worked multiple gigs. And to Catherine Whitmore, in that first 30 seconds, he was invisible. What she should have done, though she would not understand this until much later, was look more carefully. Andre Brooks had not always driven strangers across the city for hourly pay. There had been a version of him that wore a badge to a different kind of building, that sat in rooms where the decisions being made were architectural in scale, where the systems he designed moved hundreds of millions of dollars in goods across continents with frictionless precision. He had been, before the last 3 years, unraveled everything he thought he knew about his own life, a senior systems engineer at one of the country's most respected logistics infrastructure firms. He had built routing algorithms that were still in use today. He had consulted on cold chain protocols for clients whose names appeared on the sides of trucks nationwide. He had once delivered a presentation to a room of 14 senior executives that ended with a standing ovation, which he had found embarrassing because the work spoke for itself and didn't need applause. He had often been the only black engineer in those rooms, a fact that had not defined his work, but had certainly shaped the way his work was received, the small extra weight every observation had to carry before it would be heard with the same clarity others were granted by default. He had stopped counting that weight years ago. He had simply learned to do the work twice, once for the substance and once for the silence that sometimes followed. He had been by every professional metric exceptional. And then his wife left. And his daughter Maya was 6 years old and frightened, and needed him present in a way that a corner office and a 100-hour work week could not allow. So, he walked away. Not with bitterness. Andre Brooks was not a bitter man, but with the quiet, deliberate intention of someone who had decided that one thing mattered more than everything else combined. Maya mattered. The rest was negotiable. She was small for her age, with dark curls her father braided himself most mornings, sitting cross-legged on the carpet behind her while she narrated the events of her stuffed animals' lives in elaborate detail. She had her father's eyes watchful and serious, and a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit that had survived every relocation, every hard week. Every night she fell asleep waiting for her father to come home from his last shift. She was the first thing Andre thought about every morning, and the last thing he checked on every night, a small breathing proof that he had made the right choice, even on the days when the right choice felt impossible to sustain. He had never complained about the gigs. He drove when he needed to drive. He delivered when he needed to deliver. He did what had to be done without announcing it, because that was the only way he knew how to live. And on mornings like this one, when he pulled up to the curb outside a glass tower building, and a young woman in a tailored coat climbed into his back seat without looking at him, he simply put the car in drive and did his job. He had read somewhere years ago that the most dangerous form of ignorance is the kind that doesn't know it's ignorance, the kind that wears confidence so naturally it never thinks to question itself. He had thought about that a lot in the years since leaving Helios. Not with resentment, just with the particular clarity that comes from choosing invisibility voluntarily, from watching how the visible world moves and what it overlooks. He had learned more about systems, about the assumptions baked into them, the gaps that accumulate in the margins from 3 years of gig work than from 4 years behind a corporate badge. The people who ran the world's logistics networks largely did not talk to the people who moved through them. That gap was a design flaw no algorithm had ever addressed. None of the rest of it was visible from the outside. Nothing he had been was visible. That was fine with him. There is something worth pausing on here in the shape of this morning before it has fully revealed itself. 2 people in a car. One of them carrying decades of preparation, training, sacrifice, and skill in a body the other cannot quite seem to register. The other carrying urgency, ambition, and the particular blindness that comes with believing one's own pace is the only pace that matters. We tell ourselves that the world rewards merit, that talent rises, that competence eventually announces itself loudly enough to be heard. But the truth, quieter and more uncomfortable, is that competence often arrives in the wrong outfit, in the wrong neighborhood, in the wrong skin at the wrong hour, and we walk past it on our way to look for it somewhere more familiar. The cost of that walking past is rarely visible in the moment. It compounds in the margins, in the deals that fall apart, in the systems that fail, in the lives that bend around our inattention. And by the time we notice, we are usually counting the damage, not the lesson. Catherine Whitmore had built her company from the inside out. She had taken over Summit Logistics Group at 24, the youngest CEO in its history, after the board, facing a series of operational failures and a shrinking client base, decided that someone who understood systems better than politics might be exactly what the company needed. She had proven them right, and then some. In 2 years, she had restructured 3 divisions, cut waste by 31%, and secured a pipeline of new contracts that tripled the company's projected revenue. She was sharp, relentless, and almost always right about the big things. She was in some of the smaller things less careful. She judged quickly. She categorized people fast, asset or friction, relevant or ignorable. And once a category was assigned, she rarely revisited it. It was efficient, and efficiency was the principle she had organized her entire professional life around. The men and women who moved through her orbit knew this about her. Some found it clarifying. Others found it quietly dehumanizing. Rebecca, her assistant, had learned to work around it with practiced diplomacy, inserting small corrections into the margins of Catherine's assumptions whenever she could. Andre Brooks pulling smoothly into morning traffic had been filed immediately under irrelevant. He did not react to being filed. He set the navigation, checked his mirrors, and said nothing. The city moved around them in its usual compressed urgency, buses cutting lanes, delivery vans double-parked at intersections, cyclists threading the gaps with reckless confidence. Andre drove without tension, reading the traffic the way someone reads a familiar text, making small adjustments before they became necessary. He took a left where the navigation said straight, cutting through a residential block that shaved 4 minutes off the route without explanation. Catherine did not notice. She was deep in her phone call, her voice low and controlled, one hand pressed to the window as the buildings blurred past. On the seat beside her, the printed contracts fanned out across the leather pages of figures and clauses she had reviewed the night before and the night before that, and was still reviewing now in a car driven by a man whose name she had already forgotten. The deal with Richard Bennett represented something larger than money. It represented proof that Summit's northern expansion was viable, that the operational model she had redesigned from the ground up could hold under the weight of real growth. If Bennett walked, it wasn't just the capital that disappeared. It was the narrative, the next 6 months of investor confidence, the momentum she had spent 2 years building. She could not afford to lose it. Not this deal. Not this quarter. Not with the board watching every move she made, with the careful attention of people waiting to be either vindicated or alarmed. Andre, for his part, said nothing during the first stretch of the drive. He listened the way someone listens when the information arriving is already fitting itself into patterns. He recognizes the cadence of a deal under stress, the particular anxiety of a CEO trying to hold together something that wants to come apart. He had heard versions of these conversations before in other contexts, from the other side of the table. He said nothing about any of it. He drove. "Which northern route is Bennett questioning?" Andre asked quietly when she ended her call. His voice was unhurried, as though the question had been waiting for a natural opening rather than forcing one. She looked up from her phone for the first time since she had gotten in the car. She looked at him the way you look at a piece of furniture that has unexpectedly spoken. "Excuse me, the northern route, the one your partner is questioning, is it the corridor through the Riverside distribution hub or the cutoff that bypasses it?" "That is not your concern," Catherine said and returned to her phone. Andre said nothing more. He turned onto the overpass and the morning skyline opened up to the right glassy towers reflecting a colorless sky, and he drove. A few minutes later, a delivery truck lurched out of a side street without signaling. In a single smooth motion, no brake screech, no jerk. Andre had already moved the car, laterally clearing the gap before the truck had fully committed to its error. The whole thing took perhaps a second and a half. Catherine felt none of the usual lurch of near-miss adrenaline. When she looked up, the truck was behind them, already small in the mirror. She looked at the back of Andre's head for a moment before looking away. His hands, brown and steady on the wheel, had not changed. His shoulders had not changed. He had not said anything about it. No sharp intake of breath, no comment, no glance in the mirror for validation, just the adjustment, clean and automatic, and then the road continuing. She did not say anything, but something in her, some fine-tuned executive instinct for competence, had taken a small, involuntary note. They were 6 blocks from Summit's offices when Rebecca called. Her voice was tight in the way it got when she was trying to hold a problem together with both hands. "There's a situation," Rebecca said. "Richard Bennett's team just sent an emergency flag. One of the refrigerated shipments on the northern corridor, the Bennett shipment, the one tied to the expansion proof of concept, lost temperature integrity sometime in the last 12 hours. They're saying the cold chain monitoring system failed to trigger an alert. The cargo was compromised. Bennett is calling it a breach of the operational SLA." Catherine was already sitting forward. "What's the damage estimate on the cargo itself? Somewhere between 4 and 600,000. But that's not the issue. The issue is that Bennett is using it as grounds to pause the full investment commitment. He's calling an emergency review. If he walks, the northern expansion loses its anchor. $38 million gone or close to gone over a cold chain failure that no alarm had flagged." "Get me Bradley on the phone," Catherine said. "And get me the system logs from the Riverside hub for the last 72 hours. Already sending them to your tablet." Catherine ended the call and opened the file Rebecca had forwarded. Her jaw was tight, her eyes moving fast across columns of timestamps and temperature readings. The numbers were dense, the kind of data that required context to interpret context she did not, at this moment, fully have. Behind the wheel, Andre had said nothing. Then he said, "Was the shipment routed through the northern corridor on the early morning run? The one that starts around 3 o'clock in the morning?" Catherine looked up slowly with the 3 a.m. "Run through the northern corridor. There's a segment of that route between the Riverside hub and the Ashford junction where the refrigeration monitoring system has a known interference window. It happens when the relay tower on Route 9 is in maintenance mode. The alert signal gets suppressed. It's not a catastrophic failure. It's a gap. But if a shipment runs through it at the wrong time, the temperature can drift past threshold before the system even registers a warning." The interior of the car was very quiet. "How do you know that?" Catherine asked. Andre kept his eyes on the road. "I've seen it before." She stared at him for a long moment. And here, perhaps, is the first lesson the morning has to offer, the one that arrives before anyone is ready to receive it. The people we walk past most often are not the people who have nothing to teach us. They are simply the people we have decided in advance and without evidence do not require our attention. The world is full of quiet experts wearing the wrong uniforms. The cost of overlooking them is not always immediate, but it is always real. It shows up in the deals we lose, the warnings we miss, the help we refuse, because it arrives in a form we did not expect to respect. If there is a small kindness we can offer ourselves and the people around us, it is this: to leave a little more room in our judgments than we think we need to. To assume when we are uncertain that the person in front of us knows something we do not. It costs almost nothing to ask. It can cost almost everything not to. Then Bradley Foster's name lit up on her phone and she answered it. Bradley Foster's voice came through the speaker with its usual combination of authority and irritation. He had been CFO of Summit for 7 years, and in that time had developed a finely calibrated sense of when to be concerned and when to perform being concerned. This, Catherine noted, was a performance. His tone was crisp and explanatory, the voice of a man presenting a narrative he had already composed. "It's an operational failure," Bradley said. "Plain and simple. The Northern Corridor team didn't follow protocol. I've already flagged it to the logistics director." "Who approved the 3 a.m. routing?" Catherine asked. A brief pause. "That's being looked into." "Bradley, if the monitoring gap is on the Riverside-Ashford segment, this isn't a protocol failure. It's a system design issue. Who was responsible for the relay configuration on that corridor?" Another pause. Longer this time. "That's a technical question. I can have someone." "Was the relay tower on Route 9 in scheduled maintenance last night?" "See lots." Andre spoke then from the front seat, not loudly, but with a precision that cut through the ambient noise of the call. "Ask him when the maintenance window was logged and whether the maintenance schedule was updated in the central system before the routing decision was made." Catherine looked at Andre. Something in his voice had changed, not louder, not harder, just more precise. The voice of someone reading from a map he had drawn himself. "Bradley," Catherine said, "when was the maintenance window for the Route 9 relay logged in the central system?" The silence on the line went on too long. "I'll need to check the records," Bradley said finally. "Get me the records," Catherine said, "right now." She ended the call. Andre pulled into a short-term parking bay half a block from the Summit building. He put the car in park and turned around for the first time, resting one arm on the back of the front seat. He had a calm face, the kind that gave nothing away without meaning to hide anything. "If you can get the routing approval logs from the last 30 days, he said. "Alongside the maintenance schedule updates for that corridor, there's likely a pattern. Single incidents don't cause this kind of damage alone. But if someone has been routing cargo through that monitoring gap repeatedly, and if that cargo has been consistently underinsured before departure, then what looks like a system failure is something else entirely." Catherine set her phone down on the seat. "Who are you, Andre Brooks?" "I'm your driver. I know what the app says." "Who are you, actually?" He looked at her steadily. "Someone who built systems like the one your company is running before I left the industry." "You left logistics?" "Systems engineering. Cold chain logistics infrastructure specifically." A pause. "I spent 4 years at Helios Infrastructure Solutions, their northern division." Something moved across Catherine's face, not surprise exactly, but a sharp, sudden recalibration. Helios Infrastructure Solutions had designed Summit's operational backbone. The routing algorithms, the monitoring protocols, the cold chain management architecture, all of it had been delivered by Helios 6 years ago, and Summit had been running on that foundation ever since. "You worked on our system," she said. "I worked on the architecture your system is based on." "Yes. Why didn't you say something earlier?" "In the car when I was on the phone, you told me it wasn't my concern," he said. Not accusatory, just factual. The morning was moving outside the car windows, people passing on the sidewalk oblivious. The building that held $38 million and an angry investor waiting upstairs. And in this stationary car, a moment that felt suddenly disproportionately heavy. "Come upstairs," Catherine said. "I'm a gig driver," Andre said. "You hired me to get you here. I'm asking you to come upstairs." He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at his phone, a quick check no more, and nodded once. The Summit offices occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a tower on the city's east side. Catherine moved through the lobby with her usual forward momentum, and Andre followed quietly, attracting no particular attention, the kind of attention his presence would normally attract in a building like this one absent today, perhaps because he walked half a step behind a woman who clearly belonged here. Perhaps because the security guard at the desk had seen too many people pass through to bother sorting them. Either way, he moved through the marble lobby and into the elevator without being stopped. and he noted the way he always noted the small mechanics of being permitted to enter a space by virtue of someone else's certainty. Rebecca met them at the elevator banks, took one look at Andre, and then looked at Catherine with a question she was professional enough not to ask out loud. "He knows the system," Catherine said. "Get us the routing logs for the northern corridor last 30 days. Maintenance schedule updates. Insurance documentation on all cold chain shipments in that window. Everything." Rebecca was already moving. They settled into a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the city. Andre sat down at the table without being told to. "Open the laptop." Catherine slid toward him without ceremony and began working. He moved through the data quietly, methodically, without narration, the way someone works when they know exactly what they are looking for and exactly where it will be. His fingers moved quickly and without hesitation. His expression did not change. Catherine watched him for a moment, then opened her own files and worked in parallel, trying to catch up to a problem she realized with the unsettling clarity of an executive mid-crisis she had been underprepared for. Rebecca appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later with a tablet. "The logs are all there," she said. "I also found something else. 3 of the cold chain shipments in the last 30 days, all routed through the monitoring gap window, were underinsured at departure. The insurance adjustments were made manually, and the approval signature on all 3 is the same." Catherine looked up. "Bradley Foster," Rebecca said quietly. Andre had found the same thread from a different end. He turned the laptop to face Catherine. On the screen was a line of modified system data, a single entry in the maintenance schedule records dated 18 days prior, time-stamped at 11:57 at night. A retroactive update. Someone had gone into the central system and changed the maintenance window record after the fact, obscuring the overlap with the routing decision. "It's not an operational failure," Andre said. "Someone modified the maintenance log retroactively to make this look like a scheduling coincidence. Combined with the underinsurance pattern, this isn't negligence. Someone has been orchestrating this, probably routing compromised cargo through the gap, then claiming insurance losses while selling the goods off book through a separate channel." Catherine was completely still. "He's been doing this for at least 3 months, Andre added. "Possibly longer if the earlier records show the same signatures. The amount he's extracted from the insurance claims alone in the last quarter would be significant." Rebecca pulled up a chair. Her usual diplomatic composure had given way to something more direct. "I can run the earlier records. It won't take long." "Do it," Catherine said. Then she looked at Andre. At the worn shirt, the careful hands, the steady eyes that had been watching and processing and waiting since the moment she had stepped into his car. She thought about the way she had answered his first question, dismissing him without a word, returning to her phone, filing him away into the category of irrelevant. She thought about the drive through the city, the easy competence behind the wheel, the quiet question about the northern corridor that she had treated as an intrusion rather than a signal. She thought about how many signals she had missed in 3 years of running a company because they arrived in forms she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," she said. Andre looked at her. "In the car when you asked about the northern route." She paused. "I was rude to you. You were distracted," he said. "It's fine. It's not fine. I dismissed you." "People dismiss drivers," he said simply, without rancor. "It's not unusual. That doesn't make it acceptable," Catherine said. He didn't argue with her. He didn't offer her absolution either. He just nodded. A small, measured acknowledgement and returned to the data on the screen. There is something useful in noticing how he received that apology, neither rejecting it nor making her feel rewarded for offering it. It is one of the harder forms of grace, this ability to accept an apology without performing forgiveness, without making the apology about the comfort of the person offering it. It requires a kind of self-possession that does not need to be asked for, that does not arrange itself for the convenience of others. People who have spent years being misread learn this self-possession out of necessity. They learn that their feelings are not currency to be spent reassuring people who have just begun to notice them. Andre had learned it long ago. Catherine, watching him return quietly to the screen, was perhaps beginning for the first time to notice that there were forms of dignity she had never had to develop because nothing in her life had required her to. The confrontation with Bradley Foster happened in the same conference room with Richard Bennett. Joining by video from his own offices, Bennett was lean and cold-eyed. The kind of man who had been in financial rooms long enough to recognize the shape of a crisis even before it was fully named. He watched the first 10 minutes in silence, and then, when the evidence was laid out, the modified maintenance logs, the underinsurance signatures, the pattern of losses that tracked perfectly with a single approving authority. He leaned forward in his chair with the stillness of someone who has just been proved right about something he hoped he was wrong about. "How long has this been going on?" he asked. "We believe at least 3 months," Catherine said. "Possibly longer. We're still running the full audit." "And how did you identify it?" Catherine glanced at Andre, who sat at the far end of the table. "Someone who knows this system better than anyone else in this room." Bennett studied Andre with the focused attention of someone who had just recategorized a variable. "Who are you?" he asked. "Andre Brooks," Andre said. "He's a consultant," Catherine said before she had fully decided to say it. Bradley Foster, who had spent the last 20 minutes in a chair that seemed to be shrinking beneath him, finally spoke. His voice had lost its performance quality entirely. What was left underneath was smaller and less certain. "This is being taken out of context," he said. "The insurance adjustments were risk management decisions. The maintenance log update was a clerical correction." "At 11:57 at night," Rebecca said. Bradley stopped. "Using your direct access credentials," Andre added without looking up from the screen. "The system records user credentials on all retroactive log edits. It's a security feature. Whoever built this architecture." And there was nothing in his voice but flat information made sure no edit could be made anonymously. Bradley Foster looked at the table. Bennett leaned back. "I'd like to propose that we pause this conversation until Summit's board has had a chance to review these findings. If what's being presented here holds up, my firm will need to revisit the structure of our commitment, not its existence." Catherine processed that. Not its existence. The $38 million was not gone. It was waiting for the house to be put in order. "We'll have a full report to you by end of day Friday," she said. Bennett nodded. His camera cut off. The room exhaled. Bradley Foster was escorted to his office and asked to surrender his access credentials. He did not argue. Whatever version of Bradley Foster had believed he could outmaneuver the systems he was supposed to protect had left the room before he did. His resignation was submitted before the end of the business day, which Catherine accepted without comment. Notice, if you will, what real competence looks like in the room where it matters. It does not raise its voice. It does not demand the floor. It does not need the credit, though it has earned it many times over. It speaks only when speaking will move the situation forward, and it stops speaking the moment the work is done. We live in a culture that has in many ways confused competence with confidence, substance with self-promotion, ability with the willingness to perform ability for an audience. We mistake the loudest voice for the most informed one, the most polished presentation for the most rigorous analysis. But the people who actually keep things working, the engineers, the maintainers, the quiet observers who notice what others miss, rarely sound like the experts we expect. They sound like Andre Brooks in a conference room offering a sentence of clarification to a question no one else could have answered, and then going quiet again. If you want to find the people who can actually solve your problems, listen for the ones who are not trying to convince you they can. When everyone else had filtered out, Catherine found herself alone in the conference room with Andre. The afternoon light was different now, lower-angled, making the glass walls amber at the edges. He was closing the laptop unhurried, tidying the cables with the same methodical quiet he brought to everything. "You could have said something earlier," she said. "In the car, you knew then." "I had a theory," he said. "I needed data to confirm it. You still could have pushed harder. You wouldn't have listened." He said it without judgment, a statement of fact, nothing more. She wanted to deny it. She found she couldn't. "How long ago did you leave Helios?" she asked. 3 years ago." Why? He folded the laptop case closed and looked at her. Catherine thought about what that meant, what it cost to make a calculation like that, to weigh one kind of worth against another and come back without the prestige or the salary or the professional identity, to show up every morning in a different city block driving strangers to buildings like this one, knowing exactly what was being managed in the rooms they were headed to. "Does she know what you gave up?" Catherine asked. "She will someday," Andre said. "Right now she knows that her dad picks her up from school every day. That's enough." His phone lit up on the table between them. He glanced at it and something in his face changed completely. Not dramatically, not with visible emotion, but with the quiet, absolute reorientation of a compass needle finding north. He turned the phone toward her briefly. On the screen was a video call, a small face with dark eyes and her father's careful smile, her hair in two neat braids he had clearly done himself that morning, a stuffed rabbit pressed against one cheek. "Daddy," said the voice through the phone. "Biscuit found your gloves." "Tell Biscuit those are my driving gloves," Andre said, his voice entirely different now, softer, unlayered, warm in a way that had nothing to do with performance. "I'll need them back. Biscuit says finders keepers. Biscuit and I are going to have a conversation." The girl laughed, open and uncomplicated, the laugh of a child who trusts without reservation. "Love you, Daddy." "Love you more, baby girl. I'll be home soon." It was a brief call, 40 seconds, maybe less. And when it ended, Andre slipped the phone into his pocket and stood. Catherine watched him. He had been in this building for the last several hours, the most competent person in any room he had entered. He had identified a fraud that 3 years of auditing had missed. He had protected a $38 million investment with nothing but pattern recognition and a set of skills he no longer advertised. And now he was packing up to leave because his daughter had called and Biscuit had found his gloves, and that was all the reason he needed. "I'd like to offer you a position," Catherine said. He stopped. "Systems integrity consultant. You'd have access to all operational data, full salary, full benefits. You'd set your own hours within reason." She paused. "We clearly need someone who actually understands what's running underneath all of this." Andre looked at her. He didn't say yes immediately. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and she realized she had grown accustomed over the last several hours to his silences, to the fact that they were not evasions, but processing that something was always happening in them. "I'd need to be home by 3:30, he said finally. "School pickup." "I'll build it into the contract," Catherine said. He nodded once. It was not an enthusiastic nod. It was the nod of a man who had learned to weigh things carefully before agreeing to them, who knew what it cost to give your time to a building again, and was counting the cost, and had decided that this particular cost was one he could afford, not for himself, for Maya. For the future, he was building her one careful decision at a time. "I'll need the full system documentation before I start," he said. "Not just what's in the current operating manual, the original Helios specifications. You designed half of them," Catherine said. "Which is exactly why I need to see what's been changed since," he said. She almost smiled. He left the conference room and she watched him go down the hallway in his faded shirt and worn shoes, unhurried, not looking back. She stood at the glass wall of the conference room as the afternoon light continued its low angle across the city, and she thought about the morning, about the moment she had climbed into his car and dismissed him before he had finished putting the navigation on, about the way the mind creates its own shortcuts and calls them judgment. She had been right about many things in 3 years of running Summit. She had made decisions that other CEOs would not have had the nerve to make, and she had been right. She had moved fast, trusted data over instinct, cut what needed cutting, built what needed building. She had also, somewhere in all of that speed and certainty, developed a habit of not seeing the people directly in front of her. It was, she thought, a more expensive habit than she had realized. In the weeks that followed, Andre Brooks became a quiet fixture at Summit. He came in every morning at 7:30, a thermos of coffee from his own kitchen in one hand, because the office machine was, in his measured opinion, an insult to a serious beverage, and sat down at a workstation that had been cleared for him near the systems team. He spoke when he had something to say. He did not speak to fill silence. He found 3 additional irregularities in the cold chain monitoring architecture within his first 2 weeks, one a legacy gap in the original Helios design, 2 others introduced by system updates that had not been properly tested before deployment. He documented all 3 with the methodical precision of someone who had learned that the difference between a system that works and a system that fails is often a single assumption no one thought to question. The people on the systems team, initially uncertain how to categorize someone who had arrived without a formal introduction and whose desk had simply appeared one morning, came to a kind of instinctive understanding through proximity. They watched him work. They watched the way he explained problems, not with condescension, not with the impatience of someone performing expertise, but with the clarity of someone who genuinely wanted the other person to understand. Within 2 weeks, they were bringing him problems before they escalated. Within a month, they had quietly begun to treat him as something close to essential. Rebecca, who had initially offered Andre the careful diplomacy she extended to all of Catherine's unexplained decisions, had by the end of the 2nd week abandoned diplomacy in favor of direct appreciation. She left notes of thanks on his workstation after the 2nd irregularity was resolved, which prevented what would have been a significant cold chain failure on a new client shipment worth considerably more than the problem it would have caused. The board reviewed the full audit findings and voted unanimously to remove Bradley Foster. The evidence was clean and complete. The criminal referral went to the appropriate authorities without incident. Richard Bennett confirmed the investment commitment 4 days after the emergency review, citing the speed and transparency of Summit's response as evidence of operational maturity. $38 million flowed into the northern expansion on schedule. Andre was at his workstation when the confirmation came through. Catherine walked past his desk, paused, and set a printed copy of the wire confirmation down beside his keyboard without comment. He looked at it, looked at her, and gave the small, measured nod that she had begun to read over time as his version of acknowledgement. At 3:15 every afternoon, he logged off, put on his jacket, and left. Every day without variation. Sometimes Catherine would see him from her office window crossing the plaza below, walking toward the parking garage with the same unhurried gait he carried everywhere. And she would imagine the next part of his day. She could not see the elementary school several blocks east. The small girl with 2 braids and a stuffed rabbit waiting at the gate. The hand that would reach down to hers and the conversation that would begin a conversation about teachers and classmates, and whether Biscuit had behaved during math class. A conversation that had nothing to do with Summit Logistics Group, or $38 million, or the architecture of cold chain monitoring systems, and everything to do with the only architecture that had ever mattered to him. Every day without meaning to, Catherine found herself tracking the quiet departure, the soft close of the stairwell door, the absence of a presence that had become... She was slowly admitting something more than useful. She did not rush anything. She was not a person who rushed things, and Andre Brooks was not a person who could be rushed. There were things between them that were still being built. Trust that had to be constructed carefully, layer by layer on the foundation of a morning that had begun with a dismissal and ended with a reckoning. Neither of them was in a hurry. Neither of them needed to be. What she knew as she stood at the window of the conference room on a late afternoon. 6 weeks after that first morning, watching the city settle into the blue-gray calm of early evening, was this. The most important thing that had happened to Summit Logistics Group in 3 years had not arrived in a pitch deck or a board presentation or a quarterly forecast. It had arrived in a faded button-down shirt through an app on a morning when everything had already gone wrong, and she had almost missed it entirely. There is a particular kind of pride, the kind that mistakes appearance for substance efficiency, for wisdom, speed, for clarity, that convinces you that you already know what you need to know, that the categories you've built are accurate, that the people who move quietly through your peripheral vision are moving there because that is where they belong. Andre Brooks had spent 3 years in that peripheral vision, driving, delivering, picking up a small girl with dark curls from a school on the west side of the city, reading her stories at night, while Biscuit the Rabbit sat on the bookshelf, and the city hummed outside their window, living a life that looked from the outside like a reduced version of something better, and carrying underneath it a precision of mind and a depth of competence that no gig profile could communicate, that no first impression could reveal. What he had given up to be present for Maya had not diminished him. It had, if anything, clarified him, stripped away the parts of his identity that depended on being seen and recognized, leaving only what was actually there. And what was actually there, as it turned out, was more than enough. Catherine closed her laptop and reached for her coat. Tomorrow, there was a strategy review, a call with the Northern Expansion team, a follow-up with Richard Bennett's firm. There was always more to do. There always would be. But tonight, she left the office at a reasonable hour, walked through the lobby without her phone to her ear, and noticed for perhaps the first time in longer than she could honestly say, the person holding the door open for her as she stepped out into the evening air. She said, "Thank you." She meant it. Some evenings when the work had wound down and the building had mostly emptied, she found herself thinking about the version of herself who had climbed into that car 9 weeks ago, phone pressed to her ear. Contracts fanned out on the seat, a man she hadn't looked at behind the wheel. She thought about how close the whole thing had come to going differently. $38 million, a company's momentum, a fraud that might have run another 2 years unchecked. All of it balanced on a single morning. She had almost slept through a car, she had almost canceled a question she had almost ignored. The thing about competence she was learning was that it had never agreed to announce itself clearly. It did not always arrive on a resume or in a boardroom presentation. Sometimes it arrived in a faded shirt at a curbside, asked a quiet question, and waited to see whether you were paying attention. She was paying attention now, and that quietly and without announcement was the beginning of a different way of moving through the world. And so perhaps the gentlest thing this story has to leave you with is this. The life you are building is not measured by the rooms you are invited into or the titles printed on your business card or the speed with which you move through your days. It is measured in the end by the people you choose to see clearly and the people who are still waiting for you to look at them and the small daily decisions about which of those two groups you will keep adding to. Andre Brooks built his life around a 6-year-old girl with 2 braids and a stuffed rabbit. And in doing so, he also became almost as a side effect, the kind of person whose presence could change the trajectory of an entire company on a single morning. Catherine Whitmore built a company at 24, but did not begin to build a life worth running it for until she learned to say thank you to the man holding the door. There is no formula here, no 5-step framework, no efficient path. There is only this. Pay attention to who is in front of you. Make room in your judgments for the possibility that you are wrong. Choose presence over prestige whenever the choice is available, and even sometimes when it is not. The world will not always reward you for these choices, but the people who matter most will know the difference. And in the long quiet of an ordinary evening, when the city settles into its blue-gray calm and the noise of the day finally stops, that difference will be the only thing that turns out to have been worth keeping.